Well, it's recently announced that car production in the UK had fallen to 700,000 units, which is the level in 1950. It's come down almost 1 million units in the space of the last decade or so. And it's not just cars which are back to the level of 75 years ago. It's true across our large industrial landscape. Steel is a smidgen of what it was at the beginning of the 1950s and much less than it was by the end of the 1950s. It's come down from about 20 million tonnes to about 5. When we look at other areas, think about house building. We were building 300,000 houses a year in the 1950s. We can't manage much more than 200,000 now. Cement, basic indicator of what's going on in infrastructure and construction and so on, is below the levels of 1950 when we were recovering from the war. And a lot of it's imported now. These are all the results of a long process of deindustrialisation, and they're recently accelerated by having the highest industrial electricity prices in the world. And it's fed through into new stuff that we need. Almost all the net zero supply chains are foreign. We don't make solar panels. We don't make wind turbines. We don't make the cabling, or much of it, to wire up the new decentralised and intermittent technologies. This is all coming from China. And to go further forward, think about EVs. We have a fast-track target to move towards all-electric cars after 2030, even faster than the EU. Where are the cars going to come from? Well, the answer is not many from Britain and from British factories. The batteries are overwhelmingly Chinese, the minerals that go into the batteries are overwhelmingly Chinese, and the refining is overwhelmingly Chinese. And now China's built a car production level which is twice its domestic market. So expect lots of Chinese EVs on the roads. It's really quite a big transition. It's a transition out of making stuff, and presumably it's intended to be a transition into services. We could say, so what? We've stopped manufacturing and energy-intensive manufacturing, but hey, we've got services instead. And we can stand back and say, what wonderful heroes the British are to have reduced carbon territorial emissions so fast relative to everyone else. And we can do that on the back of this collapse of intensive energy industries and their imports instead. Gone is Grangemouth. Gone is much of the car industry. Gone is the fertiliser industry. Gone is the fiberglass industry. Gone is quite a lot of the steel industry. And so on and so on and so on. These declines have been continuous, but they're now much more rapid. And quite soon we will lose 3+ of the petrochemical refineries as well. So, does it matter? Why should we worry about this? Shouldn't we just say, this is the new world, it's going to be powered by AI, it's going to be digitalised, it's going to be based on services, finance, banking, etc. Well, hang on a minute. The new digital technologies are massively energy intensive. A data centre is like a steelworks, bringing forward not just the demand for energy, but the demand for continuous 24/7 energy. Intermittency, that's no good. You need to have firm power providing for these new 21st century energy intensive industries. And as for the rest, well, are we really going to make our way in the world? Are we really going to close those current account balance of payments deficits by building up our, what we might call, more manual services day-to-day services, food, hospitality, beauty treatments, and so on and so forth, spas, all that kind of stuff? Is that where our future lies? And does it also rely in the City of London? Banking, finance, accounting, law services to the global economy? Well, there's bad news on both fronts, however much one tries to think for glimmers of future economic prosperity. On the what you might call basic services, the damage done in the last two budgets is profound. If you want to increase the cost of employing labour, if you want to increase the rates taxes on smaller businesses, if you want to pump up the minimum wage, if you want to do all of these things, then the costs of these activities are going to go up, demand's going to go down, and the sectors are going to contract. These are areas where there is very large scale small business activity. Maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe it's still the bankers and the lawyers and the accountants who can do the job for us. Well, really? Have you not looked overseas and seen just how the world's geopolitics are changing? That open-traded, open financial markets world, which has dominated since the mid-1980s through to recently, is crumbling around us. And in the meantime, what we need to do, all that heavy industrialisation stuff, building the new sewers, building the new pipes, building the new reservoirs, building all that energy infrastructure, repairing the roads, it's not service stuff. This is core mainstream investment. And where's it coming from? Well, it's all being paid for by foreigners. That's the balance of payments adjustment for the fact that we import more than we export, that we have to have a financial flow coming in, and that's what explains how much of our core infrastructure and more generally our corporate structures are now foreign-owned rather than domestically. So, what are we going to do about all of this? That seems to me to be a remarkably important question, which is much neglected. Look across the political spectrum and tell me which political parties have seriously thought about coming up with an industrial strategy which is going to deal with these problems. Because the moment you start to look at what might be required, you realise the extent to which political courage is going to be required. First of all, you have to have a tax regime which supports the competitiveness of British industry. It's no good simply turning on industry to pay for extra social security payments in order to avoid making us personally pay higher income tax, VAT, or personal national insurance. Putting up national insurance to companies is defeating in the best of circumstances, but with unemployment pushing up towards 5 million, it is really not a sensible way of going about improving the competitiveness of industry. And then there's those energy costs, those pesky energy costs, which just won't go away. How is it that we're supposed to be investing in the cheapest energy available? 9 times cheaper renewables we're supposed to be investing in, and yet we've ended up with the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world. You know, at some stage, holding two completely inconsistent positions at the same time must dawn on even the most ideological of MPs. This can't go on. We cannot charge industry energy costs which reflect what we're trying to do in our domestic energy policy, ignorant and independent of what the competitive external pressures are. And here, it's not enough to exclude the large energy and industrial companies from the levies and the network charges and so on and give them subsidies. The whole of British industry, right down to the most smallest of service sector provision, is in an international market. Supply chains, the main things that go into their business models, these all have an international dimension. And so we have to have energy prices which are globally competitive. And right now, what we're doing is locking in energy prices for the next 10 to 15 years, which are way above international standards. So we'll have to do that, as well as change the taxation of business. These are big steps, very big steps going forward. And then behind all of that, we require an adjustment in the basic skills of the economy, in the workforce fit for the 21st century. Those are just 3 bits which would have to be addressed if this return to the 1950s is to be tackled head on. Taxation of business, energy cost to business, and skills and the prerequisites of a labour force fit for the requirements of the economy we have today. Now, the good news is all of that is actually possible. The bad news is that someone has to explain to us, the voters, that we are not going to be better off in the short term as a result. On the contrary, we're going to have to pay more, and in some cases substantially more, for our energy. We're going to have to pay higher personal taxes going forward, and we're going to have to pay for that skills, training and research, public goods that are required to support this. And the sad truth is, to date, the electorate don't seem to be willing to do that. Oh, and we have to think quite hard about what our net zero and climate policies are so that we actually make a difference to climate change, as opposed to the performance politics, which is territorial carbon emissions, net zero targets in the short run. To do all of that stuff, perfectly doable. What's missing is any politician willing to stand up and tell the wider public that all of this is necessary to deal with what is now a pretty accelerating rout of what's left of energy-intensive industry in the UK. We can pretend it's okay to go back to the 1950s, but you have to find someone else to pay for the much higher standard of living that we have today than those people did back in the 1950s. It's a wake-up call, one of many, many wake-up calls that keep coming along, but this is one which needs to frame the next general election. Thank you.